Hi everyone, I'm Mike Abadi and welcome to VTblogosphereTV. I am excited to announce that we are at our 4-year milestone show. It's episode number 41, and our first episode was, I checked the archives, it was June 16th, 2008. Our first guest was John Odom. He got us launched really nicely, and I'm thrilled to welcome John Walters here, who has been a front pager at Green Mountain Daily since John left, or perhaps there was a bit of overlap?
It was right around the same time. I joined as a front pager last December.
Okay.
And that was it was in January that John officially stepped back from Green Mountain Daily.
Great.
He's still around behind the scenes, but he's now the city clerk in Montpelier. So
a nonpartisan position.
A nonpartisan position and a full-time job.
That's right.
So,
ta-da. John is also a radio personality. I know you've worked on the Mark Johnson Show, and also at New Hampshire Public Radio.
Yeah, before I moved to Vermont, I was on New Hampshire Public Radio for several years. And
also an author. Your latest book is Roads Less Traveled. We'll get into that a little bit. You maintain another website, johnswalters.com.
Yeah, that's basically for my professional writing, my book and my magazine work and that sort of thing.
Excellent. So Green Mountain Daily has been very lucky to have picked up your services. You've been, first of all, the quality of the writing's excellent, and you've been prolific. You've just been paying attention and finding insights to stories.
I think I had more time on my hands than most of the other front pagers.
How'd you get started in the world of blogging with that rich background?
Well, how I got started in Green Mountain Daily was basically as an occasional poster and frequent commenter. I read the site. I was a fan of it. John Odom actually asked me to join the site. I think at that point he knew that the roster was getting a little bit thin. And he also, I think, was thinking about taking another step in his own life, which turned out to be city clerk at Montpelier, for which I think he's marvelously qualified, not because of Green Mountain Daily specifically, but because of his other experience. But anyway, he'd been after me for a while to join the site as a front pager. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do it or not. I'd never done political commentary with a partisan edge to it before in my life. But what really convinced me to do it was how nutty the Republican Party was getting. Not so much in Vermont at that point, but more generally nationally. You know, at the point where Herman Cain and Michelle Bachmann and Rick Perry were in the
primary
Republican
season,
race.
right.
And you know, Mitt Romney was pandering very hard to the hard right. And it just got to the point where I wanted to say something, and I wanted to feel like I felt like I had something to contribute, and Green Mountain Daily was a natural place to do that. And although primarily it's a Vermont political site and most of my writing there is about Vermont politics, it still makes me feel like I've got an outlet, and that in some small way I've made some difference to the political process.
Great. So yeah, a true opportunity to impact. You've actually, I'm tempted to move it right to the AG race, Sorrell and Donovan. With what, a 15-year incumbent, Bill Sorrell. You noted. You had a couple of interactions with him. One was you noted his Wikipedia page all of a sudden got a lot more dynamic.
Yeah.
If you want to share that, and then you became a centerpiece of his announcement for candidacy in an odd way.
Yes.
A strange convergence.
Well, the Wikipedia page, one day I was just curious, and I checked on Bill Sorrell's Wikipedia page, and it's not very big. But there were a number of things that were clearly written from a Bill Sorrell perspective. You know, either he wrote it, or more likely someone who supports him wrote it.
So press release kind of tone to it.
Yeah, there was even one reference to Bill in it as opposed to Sorrell, which kind of seemed awfully chummy even for Wikipedia. So there's a way on Wikipedia, very simple, where you can look at the editing history. And I did that, and I found that until early May, Bill Sorrell's Wikipedia page was very short. It was basically a stub. And then starting in early May, over a period of about 10 days, there were numerous edits by from the same IP address. And the cumulative effect was to really make it a pro-Bill Sorrell, basically a press release or a fluff piece. So I noted this on Green Mountain Daily. There hasn't been any further activity on Sorrell's Wikipedia page, but it's still there as basically a pro-Sorrell document in the guise of a Wikipedia entry. So I hope no elementary school kid is using that as a basis for their school report on the Attorney General. Right. That, as far as I know, hasn't been picked up by anybody in the media. But that's kind of an example of what I do on Green Mountain Daily. I'm not politically connected. I'm not an insider. I don't know most of the people who are active in politics. And what I do is I look around at all the stuff that's available on the public record. Bill Sorrell's Wikipedia page, Bruce Listman's Campaign for Vermont stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Randy Brock's website, the Vince Illuzzi's ethical past, various things like that. Something I wrote recently where Jack Lindley, the chair of the Vermont Republican Party, had criticized the Vermont Democrats for criticizing Maine Governor Paul LePage, who was coming to Vermont to do a fundraiser for Randy Brock. Jack Lindley said something to the effect of, these harsh personal attacks from the, gutter snipes of the Democratic Party, whereas we, were very civil when President Obama visited Vermont. And so I looked on the Vermont Republican Party website, and there was the press release that Jack Lindley put out when Obama came here, and it was insulting. It was harsh. It was not at all civil, and so I just pointed this out, and apparently nobody in the Vermont media had thought to, check what Jack Lindley actually said when Obama was here. But that's an example of what I do. Is I don't have to dig. I don't have to get sources. There's all this stuff that's out there that shows you what's really going on.
You can find the cognitive dissonance and say,
and there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in politics. On sides of the aisle, I might say, but from my point of view, there's more of it on the Republican side.
All right, so that actually brings us nicely back to Sorrell, because he ended up in his announcement of candidacy. Apparently, it's your quote is the two-fisted Attorney General. He used a line that he is known as, or that he has been called.
Yes,
and I guess. Who had 7 days? You could tell the story better.
Yeah, what happened was he started off his campaign, kickoff announcement by saying, some have called me the two-fisted Attorney General. And so Paul Heinz, who just became the Fair Game columnist at 7 Days, the Peter Frayne Memorial Chair, he thought to actually Google, Bill Sorrell, two-fisted Attorney General, and find out who had called him the two-fisted Attorney General. And there was only one match, and it was something that I'd written back in February, where I kind of offhanded comment. One of the fun things about blogging is you can just sort of toss little things in there from time to time, and I had just writing about something that Sorrell had done, I just kind of offhandedly said, Vermont's two-fisted Attorney General Bill Sorrell, not really meaning that I necessarily thought he was, a hard-nosed, pugnacious type. Even before he was challenged by T.J. Donovan, it was pretty obvious that he was kind of a soft-spoken guy.
Right. And the case you were writing about in February was?
It was when Sorrell brought a case against Brian Doobie 2 years ago for receiving impermissible benefit from the Republican Governors Association when he ran for governor against Peter Shumlin 2 years ago. So it had nothing to do, this all happened, my reference happened before T.J. Donovan entered the race against Bill Sorrell.
Right.
But to have this, half-hearted offhand comment on a blog to suddenly become the centerpiece of Bill Sorrell's campaign announcement. I said at the time, I think that if he has to look to Green Mountain Daily for complimentary references to him, then that's kind of a bad sign.
Sure.
I've since written, there have been a lot of stuff on Green Mountain Daily by me and other people about this race. The sense is that there are quite a few people in the Green Mountain Daily community who think that Sorrell has been less active and less effective than he could have been, and that he has kind of a thin record and an unfortunate record in some ways. So there's a fair amount of support for Donovan among the Green Mountain Daily community. Myself, I haven't really made up my mind yet. I do see some flaws in Sorrell, but I'm waiting to see how the whole thing plays out before, and we still got, quite a while before the primary. So
yeah, I guess 2 months will be late August.
Late August is the primary, and that's the big race.
That's a hot one, and the winner has the right to face off Fred Tuttle's old opponent,
Jack McMullen.
Thank you.
Weird. To me, it was a sign of one sign of how desperate the Republicans are this year. I think the Vermont Republican Party is in pretty bad shape right now. And pulling Jack McMullen out of the weeds, after his 2 unsuccessful runs for Senate, most notably his defeat by Vermont farmer Fred Tuttle, to me it's a sign, and Jack McMullen has a law degree, but he's never practiced law. And is that really the best the Republicans can do? I don't know. Apparently so. But it's one sign that the Republicans are really in desperate straits this year, in spite of the very brave words from their chairman, Jack Lindley.
So the Democratic primary there is most likely to actually be the general election. That looks to be
and I have no idea how it's going to go. I mean, it's very difficult to defeat an incumbent, any incumbent.
Right.
But Donovan does seem to have some very strong support. He's gotten a lot of union endorsements. We'll see where it goes from here.
Sure.
I'm sure that's one of the things that we'll be following very closely on Green Mountain Daily between now and late August. Right.
Now, was there an element of flattery at all in when you heard that you were actually the source of the Sorrell quote? That was
it was shock more than anything else. It's funny. I write this stuff, and I'm sitting in my home office writing this stuff, and it goes out there, and I'm not necessarily aware because I don't hang around the State House. I don't even. I don't really. Once in a while, I hear a little, whisper or tidbit or secondhand remark that makes me think that there must be people in and around the State House who are reading Green Mountain Daily and taking note of what I say. But you don't get that immediate reaction. I don't get it anyway. So to suddenly see that, some say that I'm the two-fisted Attorney General, and I'm the one who said that he was a two-fisted. It's kind of one of those Alice in Wonderland kind of moments, I guess. So,
you've also had a bit of fun with Randy Brock's running for governor on the Republican side, and Pete Shumlin is looking at 60+% approval ratings at this point. And you've been keeping an eye on the level of, I guess, professionalism of the Randy Brock website, which is, it's another example. Click and see.
Yeah, it's another example of what's out there, just looking at what's out there and interpreting what you think it means. And Brock, until sometime in May, had a very rudimentary website. It was something that looked like, somebody's, free template website design thing. And a lot of the stuff that was on it was about, his campaign for Auditor General, which was like 6 years ago now. So it seemed laughable for a guy who was the apparent choice of the Vermont Republican Party to lead their ticket in 2012. It was ultimately, so I wrote a couple of times, Randy Brock still has a really lousy website, and pointed out the deficiencies, including some obvious grammatical errors that were never corrected. And then when he officially announced his candidacy and his campaign team, it was changed to a much more slick, professional-looking website. But there's still really not a lot of content in it, and there are some obvious, little grammatical things in it that really aren't as good as they ought to be. And it was done, a lot of his campaign is being done by, highly paid, out-of-state consultants. There's a firm in Indiana, there's one in California, there's one in Ohio that are basically doing the nuts and bolts of his campaign. And if you look beneath the surface, the photo of sort of, slightly faded, slightly out of focus Vermont landscape, it's clear that a lot of content comes straight out of some, how to build a Republican candidate's, website template somewhere. And there's not a lot of thought or originality in it. And, my comment at the time was they probably would have done better hiring some young Republican computer major from UVM to do it.
Knows the state.
But I think he's clearly not getting his money's worth out of those out-of-state consultants, at least not so far.
And another character in the in the Vermont politics narrative you've been keeping a good eye on is Bruce Listman. And I don't know if you coined the term Listmania, but I'm grabbing onto that. You copyright that before someone else does. I like it.
That was the first diary that I wrote about him was titled Listmania, and it was back in like December, early January, and it was just based on the fact that I listen to WDEV a lot. And
it's a great station,
a very good station, one of the few local stations that's still left anywhere, and they were running a whole lot of campaign for Vermont ads. Bruce Listman's supposedly nonpartisan issue advocacy organization. Now Listman, for those of you unfamiliar, is a Vermont native who went off to Wall Street and made a fortune, rose in the ranks of Bear Stearns and became one of their top executives, and then retired in 2009, came back home to Vermont, and is using a small part of his fortune to fund the campaign for Vermont. And what struck me just listening, at that point he was pretending to be nonpartisan, and he was even claiming to be a Democrat himself, and maybe he's been a Democrat, maybe he's still registered as one somewhere, but if you listen to the content of his ads and you read what's on his website, it's clear that the positions he is espousing and is pushing through his organization are conservative, free market, Republican type principles. And it was clear that he was spending a lot of money by Vermont standards, not by Karl Rove standards, but by Vermont standards. He was spending a lot of money to influence the political discussion at a time when no politicians were actually technically running for office yet through the first half of this year. And so, I started just looking at what was publicly available to try to figure out who this guy was and what he really stood for. And one of the things I came up with, again, the theme of, finding stuff that's available online and running with it, was a speech that he gave a couple of years ago before a group of sort of business types in Burlington that was preserved by the Community Access Service in Burlington.
There you go.
On their
Transparency,
website.
that's what we're all about.
And instead of a 30-second ad, you got 40 minutes of Bruce Listman. And he was obviously extremely conservative. He was calling for capital gains tax cuts and tax cuts for the wealthy. And he was calling for higher taxes for the poor and middle class. I mean, he said, the fact that poor people don't pay income tax, they should pay something.
Everyone needs to have a stake in this game, right?
Skin in the game.
Yeah.
And he made a very weird reference to the Wall Street collapse of 2008 as this thing that happened. As opposed to this thing that was caused by the people who worked around him on Wall Street.
It's a force of nature. It's like Irene.
So it's something that you can't obviously blame anyone for.
He retired in 2009 and returned to Vermont. Is that the timeline there?
Yeah. Bear Stearns collapsed in 2008. He worked for another Wall Street house for a while and then retired to Vermont. And now he's He's been throwing his weight around. He hasn't been very active the last month or so. I actually just checked his website last night, and there's not much new stuff on there. So I don't know if he's saving his ammunition for later in the campaign season, or if he's taken a step back. I don't know.
Yeah, it seemed early on that he may be getting poised to run for something, but apparently this cycle's not happening, huh?
Yeah, I didn't think he was running for anything this time around, but I did think that he might be setting himself up for a run in 2014 or 16, you know, trying to avoid the trap that Jack McMullen and Rich Tarrant fell into. Rich guys who came to Vermont, were obvious carpetbaggers, and didn't have any legitimacy. If Bruce Listman started this website and started this campaign where he was trying to, you know, foster positive policy positions, then he would have more legitimacy later. You know, in a couple of years' time, he would be taken more seriously as someone with some heft and some presence in local politics. At this point, we'll see. I mean, he hasn't been doing much the last month or so. We'll see if he's saving his ammo or if he's gotten bored with it. I don't know. Or maybe he's gotten tired of being criticized by Green Mountain Daily. I don't know. I'd hate to think we had that much power, but you never know.
Furiously checks, refreshes the GMD page. So he's actually is born and grew up in Vermont and does have, you know, roots he can claim anyway.
Yeah. So. I mean, so could Rich Tarrant for that matter. But, you know, not even necessarily so much being a carpetbagger as being someone with no political experience trying to jump into politics on the basis that he has a whole lot of money to spend. And in that case, in that sense, you know, maybe he's thinking about running at some point in the future, but we'll see. Yeah,
this discussion about, you know, who's a native and who isn't reminds me a bit of the Doobie campaign when he was running for, what was his line, Pure Vermont? Had that kind of, you know, Shumlin's family hasn't been here as long as mine has, or something.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the whole question of native versus, you know, flatlander is a little overblown. I mean, not every Vermont native is a saint, and not every flatlander is a sinner.
Right, right. But, that definitely plays into our politics.
Yes.
Kind of
yes.
Who really belongs? And that might be a nice segue into your book, Roads Less Traveled. Because is it interviews with northern New Englanders, or how would you?
Well, Roads Less Traveled, Visionary New England Lives, available at a fine bookstore near you, or it should be, is a collection of profile pieces of some of the most interesting people I've come across in the last 10 or 12 years of working in print and in radio at New Hampshire Public Radio. Just people from all walks of life. You know, a Russian Orthodox priest in Claremont, New Hampshire, who is a world-class iconographer. He's an artist who makes icons for Orthodox worship. And when Solzhenitsyn lived in Vermont in exile, this priest was Solzhenitsyn's parish priest. You know, a woman who lives in Haverhill, New Hampshire, who was a pop singer in the 50s and a child star in the 30s and 40s. A woman from Keene, New Hampshire, who wrote the screenplay for the movie The Blob, the original The Blob, starring Steve McQueen, and was a Hollywood actress in the 30s and 40s. Just, there are interesting people everywhere, and I took some of the most interesting I'd met and wrote profiles of them and put them in the book. Most of them are not particularly famous. There are some people who are famous in their field, and the most famous, I suppose, is probably Will Ackerman, the guitarist and producer, the founder of Windham Hill Records, who lives in southeast Vermont. I was lucky enough to get to interview him at length a couple of times and write his story, which is an amazing story. So it's a collection of profile pieces of interesting people, and they can find it at their local bookstore or going to my website, which is johnswalters.com, my middle initial S. And thus endeth the commercial.
Now, it's a little New Hampshire heavy. Is that fair to say? Which is great. I mean, that's great.
It's about, a lot of the people actually are from sort of the Connecticut River Valley, as it turned out. But it's about 2/3 New Hampshire and about 1/3 Vermont people. And it's been, you know, selling steadily in both states. I hope people check it out, because I was really honored to get to tell the stories of these people, and I think these are people worth knowing and worth reading about.
Right.
So.
And you were saying when you left New Hampshire in
we moved here at the end of '05.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were feeling that New Hampshire was kind of following the Vermont blueprint of moving from a rock rib Republican state to blueing up. I don't know, moving purple into blue.
I mean, Gene Shaheen was a successful governor. The legislature was trending more Democratic. You know, there were some Democratic victories here and there, and it seemed to be moving away from the hardcore, old-line, anti-tax conservative New Hampshire. And of course, since I left, the Tea Party explosion happened, and it happened in New Hampshire as violently as anywhere else. Yeah. And New Hampshire is now, still has a Democratic governor, but New Hampshire has a very, very one-sided Republican majority in the legislature, and it's a very, very hard-right conservative, and highly recommended for people's entertainment value is to read our sister site bluehampshire.com, which covers New Hampshire politics from a left-wing perspective. And they can read there about some of the hijinks that go on in New Hampshire these days. And I'm hoping that there's a little bit of a move to the center in the works for this fall, because I think the Republicans have taken it too far, even for the taste of many Republicans.
Right, right. That was 2010. New Hampshire really sort of turned back hard.
Yeah.
And now it seems Romney is treating New Hampshire more as his home state than he is Massachusetts. He actually hopes to win it.
Yeah.
I guess he's summered up.
Well, he's had a summer home on Lake Winnipesaukee for a long time. And actually, even when he was governor of Massachusetts, he probably spent more time in New Hampshire than he did in Massachusetts. And he certainly is trying to distance himself as much as he can from, you know, the one piece of actual public service he's ever done. But that's the way the Republicans are in 2012, is he can't run on his record in Massachusetts, even though it's not half bad.
Right.
Because it's too liberal for the current Republican Party.
Well, today is June 28th, 2012, and it will go down in history as the day the Supreme Court said the individual mandate is constitutional. So apparently Mitt Romney was right. I mean, he was the first state to do that.
Yes, the Massachusetts mandate stands up.
But I don't know what he does now that he's been running away from it, and now there's no reason to run away from it anymore.
He seems to be running away from almost everything. I don't know. He's not running a very good campaign from what I can see. Obama ought to be beatable just because of the economy, and Romney is not a very strong candidate.
Right.
He was by far the best the Republicans had this year, but he's not doing terribly well as far as I'm concerned.
And is he hoping against hope to win New Hampshire, or do you actually think that's a competitive race over there?
I'm not that in touch with New Hampshire politics these days, and I have no idea what's going on over there, you know, to what extent there is a backlash against what the local Republicans have been doing.
The backlash against the backlash.
I'll be very interested to see what happens in New Hampshire, not only with Romney, but with the state races this fall.
Yeah.
So,
that was a really good walk around the area. Got some good, I mean, there's some really incumbents that look very comfortable. But thanks for highlighting some of the stuff that's in flux right now. And keep doing what you're doing at GMD. Wow.
Well, thank you.
You're really taking it to a nice level. Good evening, everyone. Good night. Thanks.
Thank you, New Hampshire. Tonight we made history. This state has always been a very special place for our family, and I have made a home here. We filled it with great memories of our children, our grandchildren. The Granite State moment we've just enjoyed is one we will always remember. And I have my 5 sons behind me and our daughters-in-law and grandkids somewhere around here. Where are they? They're right behind us. It's great to have family here. You know, tonight we celebrate, tomorrow we go back to work. We do remember when Barack Obama came to New Hampshire 4 years ago, He promised to bring people together. He promised to change the broken system in Washington. He promised to improve our nation. Those were the days of lofty promises made by a hopeful candidate. Today we're faced with the disappointing record of a failed president.